Before we get into this video, I would like to thank my patrons, Harpy, Corporal Hot Pockets, and Salvatore Di Pietro. The three of you make this channel possible, and you guys are awesome. Hey all, welcome back to the channel. So this video is definitely a different format from my normal video essay format. It's kind of just a simple, easy to make video that I'm gonna put out there while I work on other things like my History of the UNSC Infinity videos. And also, I was inspired by the YouTuber Perun to make this kind of PowerPoint format. Perun makes a lot of really interesting videos about the military-industrial complex globally, and I like the style, so I thought, you know what, why not? Why not try it for some fun, and let's see how it goes. That said, what we're going to be discussing today is the UNSC, and really its evolution, why it really struggled industrially during the Covenant War, or at least so it seemed, and how it was able to just get back on its feet so quickly after the war, and how it became so seemingly powerful until Halo 5 Guardians happened, and, well, you know the rest. So, that said, let's just dive right into it. The first thing we need to address is the economy of the human sphere. So, the human sphere can be divided into two regions, which is the inner and the outer colonies. Initially, there were 210 inner colonies that were established, and they had to have some pretty strict standards with who could settle there. After all, this had never been done before. Interstellar travel was pretty expensive because, well, it was brand new. It was just a case of, we have to do this the right way the first time, otherwise, if we don't, it will be a disaster. So, as a result, the 210 inner colonies were pretty much consisted of humanity's elite. Now we can contrast that with the outer colonies, which had far loosened standards as interstellar travel became more affordable and convenient. There was also an incentive to establish an outer colony for profit. So let's just think about it like this. There is an entire planet out there just for you, with all the resources and land and everything else on it that's at your disposal. You could do what you want with it, harvest it, exploit it, and make a profit. So as a result, there were far more outer colonies than inner colonies. As of 2490, there were a registered 800 colonies, and in all likelihood, that number continued to grow. So there were 590 plus outer colonies. And of course, all of them were gathering material, growing food, and just selling all of that stuff. And they flooded the market with everything they made. And so, as a result, the inner colonies, who had their own resources, didn't really have to, build the infrastructure to harvest those resources. They could just simply buy it from the outer colonies. And they began to process that food and material to make products and ships and more that was then distributed around the human sphere. Just from an economic standpoint, and this isn't flat out stated in lore, so this is really just my opinion here, the reason the inner colonies did this is because it would be cheaper and easier to buy from the outer colonies than to simply do it themselves. The outer colonies had oversaturated the market with their produce, thus allowing the inner colonies to buy in bulk for pretty damn cheap prices. And of course, again, the inner colonies had their own resources, but it was just simply cheaper and easier to buy in bulk from the outer colonies. And that leads us into the UNSC and insurrection, or more specifically, the UNSC's war footing. The UNSC wasn't geared towards a conventional war. The insurrection was really just an unconventional fight. It was the UNSC's Vietnam. And so a conventional force really doesn't want to take on an unconventional force. It doesn't work out well. We've seen it throughout history. And so as a result, the UNSC spent the better part of a few decades really digging into counterinsurgency rather than conventional warfare. That said, as the insurrection went on, it slowly ramped up, and it would have become a conventional war were it not the Covenant. That said, it became close enough to a conventional war that it gave the UNSC the ability to swiftly switch to a proper war footing when the Covenant invaded. That said, the UNSC was not experienced in conventional war. It was an untested force. The interplanetary war was centuries ago by the time of 2525, and so as a result, the UNSC really didn't have any good metric to base their knowledge on, because, again, the interplanetary war was fought in a time forgotten, well, not a forgotten time, but in a long period of time ago, when technology was different, when technology was less advanced. There wasn't ship-to-ship engagements back then, boarding action was the way to go, and now we have to contest with things like the longsword, magnetic accelerator cannon, archer missile pods, things like that. Things that just weren't used in a conventional setting. So there was that. And also, again, the UNSC was just not experienced in ship-to-ship engagements. The first ship-to-ship engagements occurred during the insurrection. And even then, the engagements of the insurrection differed drastically from the engagements of the Covenant War. Use of Max was relatively new, and you know what? Let's take a look at an example here. The UNSC Gorgon and the Bellicose. These two ships fought for about half an hour. The Gorgon had already fought in a few different instances, and so its crew was pretty exhausted and a lot of its ammunition was depleted, but it was in a relatively even fight with the Bellicose. The two fought for about half an hour, exchanging archer missile pods, and with the Gorgon firing its magnetic accelerator cannon, and that would have been a death blow for the Bellicose, but the Bellicose used some clever maneuvering with its archer missile pods to basically avoid the magnetic accelerator cannon. So, as a result, the two ships were forced to move off after fighting for a good while. This is different from the ship-to-ship engagements of the Covenant War, where the outcome of a battle is decided in seconds, minutes at most. And, of course, the Covenant itself is a lot more advanced. It has more experienced Sangheili shipmasters who know strategies, who know theories, and really all around, they don't have to apply that experience because the UNSC doesn't have shielding, doesn't have plasma guidance. It's pretty damn weak compared to the Covenant. And so, as a result, we get the opening blunders of the Covenant War and its inevitable correction. So going into the war, the UNSC did actually make some mistakes, though this wasn't due to incompetence, but rather a lack of understanding. They didn't know much about the Covenant, they didn't really know what they were getting into. So really, when the Covenant first attacked Harvest, their first mistake was simple. The UNSC attempted to meet force with force, losing a lot of ships in the process, and then they continued to launch counteroffensives to retake Harvest, really, and as a result, a good chunk of what was, at the time, the largest buildup in UNSC Navy history was bogged down on a single planet while the Covenant was launching incursions into the rest of the human sphere. Now, from a strategic standpoint, the Harvest campaign was a waste, because at the end of the day, what does it accomplish? Well, nothing. You get a glassed world. That's really all you get. Now, of course, as you know, in the end, it was ultimately a good thing that the Harvest campaign occurred because of the events of Halo Wars, which did actually save the UNSC's bacon. That said, from a logical standpoint, ignoring that, at the start of the war, the UNSC doesn't know about the Forerunners and things like that. They just see that Harvest has been glassed, and that the Covenant are making incursions into their territory, so they try to meet force with force, when they don't have the forces to match the Covenant's overwhelming power. And, of course, as we know, the UNSC stuck to this tactic for at least 5 years before beginning to properly withdraw. Lots of capital ships, such as Orion carriers, were lost pretty early on, destroyers suffered heavy losses, and, of course, the UNSC realizes, oh, wow, the Covenant are moving really fast, we need to consolidate, we need to get our stuff together, but the Covenant are moving too fast. So, as a result, they launch Operation Silent Storm, which had the intention of, well, drastically disrupting the Covenant supply lines, and, well, it did work, for the most part. Old ship designs are also brought out of storage, the Diligence and Halcyon, and the UNSC really just aimed to delay the Covenant and just consolidate itself. But, of course, this didn't stop the outer colonies from being lost, and this led to the Snowball Effect. That leads us into the Snowball Effect. So the loss of the outer colonies really screwed the UNSC over, because that is 3/4 of the human sphere just gone. And I know people will say, well, it took place over the course of 10, 11 years, but we have to remember, space is huge. To lose nearly 600 worlds in just 10 years, it's scary, quite frankly. It is huge. It is a devastating blow. So as a result, there was a migration crisis, there was a food crisis, there was a material crisis, there was an administration crisis, and there was a lack of infrastructure to really address this. Because again, the outer colonies was the breadbasket and proverbial gold mine of the human sphere. With them gone, well, now the inner colonies has to go rely on its own resources, which it has, but again, the infrastructure just isn't there. And of course, it can't produce enough food to feed its own population, and the billions upon billions of refugees flooding in from the outer colonies. And so as a result, literally any patch of grass that could maybe be arable is farmed. As an example, Cole Protocol, Victory Farms, if you know, you know. And the migrants, the refugees, they were living in squalor, tent cities. They were occupying public areas, stadiums. It was really just a complete and total disaster. And that leads us into the Cole campaigns and Cole Protocol. So Preston J. Cole was given command of a significant portion of the Navy, and he decides to fight in the outer colonies for an additional 5 years. In the process, he wins multiple engagements, but each one comes at a significant cost. That said, Cole gains very significant information about the Covenant's knowledge of humanity. You see, the Covenant doesn't really know much about humanity. They're kind of just walking blind here, and so Cole drafts the Cole Protocol, which really changes the game. And long story short, the Cole Protocol deserves its own video, but in short, it is a protocol for all UNSC and really human ships to follow to deny the Covenant any access to navigational data. If you're under attack by the Covenant and you need to run, you need to make an emergency jump to a random point in space, away from a colony, so that way you cannot return to human space, or at least to a colony, until you know that you have not been pursued. If you are being pursued and you cannot escape, then just purge your astronavigational data, destroy the AI, destroy your information, and if need be, destroy your ship. That's what matters, because if the Covenant discover any sort of astronavigational data, who knows how many millions will die. So as a result, the Covenant advance does actually slow dramatically. This gives the UNSC time to actually reorganize, industrial problems are solved, and the UNSC Navy even balloons in size dramatically. When we compare the size of the Harvest campaign to just how ludicrous fleets like the Home Fleet and the Epsilon Eridani fleet were by the end of the war, you just can't compare. The UNSC really did balloon in size. And of course, ONI Section 1 began a massive intelligence and counterintelligence campaign. Strategies and technologies were developed. The Covenant also fails to adjust to new human resistance, keeping to a consistent tempo that the UNSC does exploit very well. ONI, of course, reverse engineers multiple technologies, Covenant technologies, I should add, and some Forerunner tech. The UNSC Navy gets even better at fighting, and even after Cole goes MIA at Psi Serpentis, the UNSC Navy continues to just get better, and its officers are well trained, they're very competent, they're very talented, and as a result, we get into the decline and attrition phase. So even though the UNSC has grown in size, or specifically the Navy, and really everything is going towards the war effort and the UNSC has gotten really good at fighting, the Covenant begins to wear down humanity. As the war carries on, the fighting grows more intense. With every fight, losses begin to mount as the fighting grows more and more brutal. And then, of course, we have to account for Thel 'Vadami, who begins to outmaneuver the UNSC, dealing a series of major and successive blows to humanity. Ships can be replaced. Crews are another story, and we should note that. Thel 'Vadami destroyed a lot of ships, not to mention planets. And of course, once again, ships can be replaced, crews cannot. At least, not easily. A crew needs to be trained, they need to be educated, they need to gain experience, and loss of an experienced crew is a disaster, which is why a lot of systems in real life will prioritize keeping the crew alive rather than keeping the ship or the asset around. Obviously, the best thing and the best way to keep your crew safe is to ensure that the asset is not lost in the first place. But if you have to choose between the asset and the crew, you're going to choose the crew, because even if you lose the asset, you could replace the asset and then put that crew on the new shiny thing, and they'll be able to get back into the action much quicker than if you then have to retrain an entirely new crew and this crew has little experience. It's really just you can't compare the two, really. It's better to keep a pre-existing crew than to have to make a new one from scratch. And of course, well, veterans of the war are few and far between because the war has such a high mortality rate. Making matters worse is the largest capital ships are being lost one by one, and initially, it's okay if you lose one capital ship. It's bad to lose any capital ships at all, but you can afford to lose one. That said, one by one, you're slowly going to dwindle in your capacity to effectively coordinate your fleets and perform functions. And large capital ships are very difficult to produce. Even when you have the material in the industry, they just take time. They take time to make, they take time to staff. It's just a pain in the ass, simply put. And the UNSC is losing its largest capital ships, like the Punic supercarriers. And by 2552, there's only one Punic left, the Trafalgar. So, there's that problem. And then the other issue is that the UNSC is struggling to get crews into these new ships. As a result, frigates are utilized more often, filling in for destroyers now and again. New designs are drafted to account for these shortcomings, like the Trident, which fills the role of both a frigate and a destroyer, but they either don't enter service in time or just aren't produced in significant enough numbers. By 2552, the UNSC's capacity to fight has been eroded significantly due to simple attrition. Here's the thing about military-industrial complexes and wartime economies. They're very hardy things. They last for a long time until they don't. It's slow but steady, and then all at once. And then, of course, there was Reach, which practically decapitates the UNSC. The UNSC loses its largest military-industrial hub ever, its command and control center, its largest fleet, a big chunk of its officer corps. It is a disaster. Not to mention the Spartans, the capital ships, the Trafalgar goes down, which means now the UNSC Navy is vastly depleted. Consolidations take place on Earth. If Sol goes, well, that's it. The UNSC truly has lost. Because Mars is it, Earth is it. It's not that there are no other inner colonies. There's plenty of other inner colonies, but if Earth and Mars go, that effectively guarantees that the UNSC loses any capacity to replenish itself, or at least what little it can. But due to the severe losses, the home fleet consists mainly of frigates and some marathons. The attacks on Mars and Earth also cripple what industry is left. So now we have the UNSC fighting to the last bullet, to the last man, and the UNSC would have lost. I want to make this clear. The UNSC would have lost Earth. Humanity would have gone extinct were it not for the Covenant Great Schism. The UNSC did not defeat the Covenant, it simply outlasted it. Truth would have won if the Sangheili did not fight back against him. So, that brings us to the post-war rearmament. The war traumatizes the Navy. The Navy consolidates its few remaining assets to basically reorganize them into what few fleets they can muster. Rapid modernization and remilitarization efforts are conducted. Smaller and more efficient designs are introduced. New lines are built upon the bones of old lines, like the Autumn class, and older modules, like the M42 Archer missile pod, become standard on ships for ease of production. The UNSC basically takes a stance of gradual improvement during this phase. Lessons from the Covenant War have been learned, and the UNSC basically decides, you know what? Quality over quantity. If we have a ship, we're going to prioritize getting that ship up to speed instead of just making a new one from scratch. We can't put every up-to-date module, every good module on every ship, so what we're going to do is we're going to slowly but surely add these modules over time. So as an example, with the Strident class and the shielding, not every Strident class has shields, even though it should be able to have them. Well, it's not that the Strident that is being made isn't made with can't have shields. It's simply that the UNSC doesn't have the module for it yet. So the Strident is introduced, and then later on, when the module becomes available, the module is fitted onto the Strident. Things like that. Old and new technologies are blended together. If it flies and shoots, it can be used, and this effort really does pay off. The UNSC also immediately works to regain its industrial base, and the UNSC is also able to reclaim lost territory and reactivate old facilities. They also salvage wrecks, and really, they have learned their lesson. And it's all about ensuring that what happened with the Covenant War doesn't happen ever again. That's really the priority of the UNSC and the Office of Naval Intelligence, going as far as to even undermine their own allies in the Swords of St. Helios, if it means ensuring the UNSC remains on top. Of course, we also have to remember that the UNSC Infinity, which had already been under construction for a while at this point, was introduced not too long after the war ended. So as a result, the Infinity really does change the game and allows the UNSC to expand its range, its expedition capabilities, and things like that. And as a result, the post-war UNSC is definitely smaller than what it used to be, but it is arguably more powerful. It's more advanced. Its ability to introduce new technology is definitely hampered, but it accounts for this by taking a policy of, okay, modular. I forgot I feel so bad for forgetting the term, but basically modularity. A ship can be configured, have new modules taken out and put in as needed, pretty much. Modularity. And it works out. That's really why the UNSC became so damn powerful. And with that said, I really don't have anything more to add. This is a rambly video. I had a lot of fun with this. Obviously, I was not as clear and concise. This is the first time I ever did this. But you know what? I had a lot of fun. And if you want me to do more videos like this, I will happily do more. That said, let me know what you guys think. I hope to see you in the comments on my Discord, maybe on my Patreon, and I will see you in the Cosmos, friends.